Caleb Boone saw her when his horse came to an abrupt stop in the middle of the desert. A human figure hung upside down from the branch of a dead tree, her long black hair sweeping through the dust. A rope was tightly wrapped around her skinny ankles, digging into the flesh until it turned dark purple. Her torn leather dress was stained with dried blood and red sand. Her face was flushed and swollen, lips cracked open as each breath escaped in painful gasps. The Arizona sun poured down like it was trying to squeeze the last drop of life out of her body. Caleb did not need to look for long to understand this was no accident. This was how the town taught a lesson to those who did not belong. An Apache girl, poor, ragged, that alone was enough for them to accuse her of theft. Caleb held the reins tightly. In his mind, a familiar voice spoke. Just keep riding. He had learned long ago not to get involved in other people's business, ever since war and death had taken everything he once loved. But then the girl twitched. A strained breath escaped her dry throat. If he left, she would not survive until sundown. But if he cut her down, the people who strung her up would never let him go unpunished. Caleb let out a breath as heavy as lead. He tied up his horse, stepped toward the tree, and climbed the cracked, dry trunk. The knife at his hip glinted under the sun. Just one cut, he thought, but he knew all too well some cuts never truly heal. The rope snapped, her body fell, and so did the fate of Caleb Boone. Before the story goes any further, if you were listening on a quiet evening, go ahead and take a sip of tea, relax a little, and let me know where are you listening from. Caleb laid her on the ground, her back resting against the dry trunk of the tree. Her body was lighter than he had expected, but her breathing was heavy and strained. He knelt down and pulled a water canteen from his saddle. There was just under half left. In this season, that would be enough to keep one person alive for 2 more days if they were careful. He tilted the canteen, letting a few drops touch her lips. She coughed hard, water spilling from the corners of her mouth, then managed to swallow. Her dark eyes opened just a sliver, clouded by pain and sun. Caleb said nothing. He was used to staying silent around those who were close to death. From a low bush to his left, something moved. Caleb turned, hand on his gun. A small boy stepped out thin, barefoot, face covered in dust. He froze when he saw the tall man standing there, then ran forward and dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around the woman's head. Mother. That one word was enough for Caleb to understand. If he walked away now, neither of them would survive. He stood up and looked around. No signs of a fight. No drag marks, only hoofprints deep in the hardened sand. Fresh ones, not farmers' horses. These tracks were familiar to him. Long distance horses carrying heavy loads, not turning back anytime soon. Caleb clenched his jaw. Human trafficking, he thought. It was not the first time he had heard of it, but this time it had happened right outside the town. He crouched down, tore a strip from his shirt, and wrapped it around her bruised ankle to help with the swelling. The boy stared at him without blinking. Like he was looking at some strange creature. Caleb handed him a piece of hard bread. The boy took it, but did not eat it. He ran and placed it in his mother's hand first. Caleb turned away and resecured the saddle. "Can you ride?" he asked, not sure if she could even understand. She gave a faint nod. He lifted her onto the horse and tied her in place. The boy climbed up behind her, holding on tightly. Caleb led the horse on foot, careful not to leave deep tracks. He walked behind them, brushing away footprints with a dry branch. As the sun began to dip low on the horizon, he looked back one last time. Far off in the distance, a thin line of dust was rising, not from the wind. Caleb Boone knew this much for certain. Some people do not stop until their prey has stopped breathing. They left the open sands just as the sun began to soften. Caleb led the way into a narrow canyon where gray rocks stacked on top of each other like clenched teeth. In here, the wind was quieter. So were the tracks. He stopped by a rock wall and raised a hand to signal a halt. The boy understood quickly. He tugged at his mother's shirt and the two of them slipped into the shade. Caleb knelt down, used a branch to sweep away the fresh hoofprints in the thin sand, then scattered loose stones over the spot. Nia watched it all with unblinking eyes, the kind of eyes that belonged to someone used to being betrayed. Caleb pulled out a small knife and placed it on the ground between them. Then he unholstered the shotgun at his side and set it next to the knife. He stepped back, hands at his sides. "Your turn to keep watch," he said, his voice low, offering no explanation. Nia did not move right away. She looked at the gun, then at him. A long silence stretched out between them, filled only with the hum of insects. Finally, she bent down and picked up the weapon. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from memory. Caleb turned his back, leaned against the stone, and closed his eyes. He slept like a man with nothing left to lose. Night fell quickly in the canyon. The boy Tomas sat close to his mother, still holding the piece of hard bread he had saved since the afternoon. He broke it in half and handed the other piece to Caleb as he opened his eyes. Caleb shook his head. Tomas did not lower his hand. At last, Caleb took it and bit off a small piece. Nia watched. She said nothing. As they moved on, Caleb showed Tomas how to find water using damp moss and the cracks of stone. How to step on rock instead of sand to avoid leaving tracks. The boy learned fast, too fast for his age. When they reached the edge of a pine forest, Nia stopped. She turned to Caleb, her voice. "You should go on alone." Caleb did not ask why. "They will not stop," she said. "If you stay, you will die." Caleb looked into the forest where the shadows grew thicker. Then he looked back at the mother and child. "I am already dead," he replied. "Just not buried yet." Nia said nothing. She turned away and stepped into the forest first. Less than a mile later, Caleb raised a hand, signaling a sudden stop. He crouched down and felt the damp ground beneath the pines. Fresh hoof prints, for horses moving slow, steady hands. Caleb looked up. In the forest, the sound of hooves was faint, but close enough to know their direction was locked in. He tightened the strap on his gun. The escape was over. Now came the hunt. They moved deeper into the pine forest as night fell. The air was thick with the smell of sap, and the ground beneath their feet was damp and soft, swallowing the sound of their steps. Caleb took a roundabout path, avoiding the hunting trails. He did not look back, but he knew the mother and child were still following just a few steps behind. Not closer, not farther. They stopped by a narrow rock crevice, sheltered from the wind. Caleb built a fire low and small, just enough for warmth. He hung a small pot over it, poured in the last of their water, and added some dried roots and salted meat. Not much, but it was hot. He slid the pot toward Nia first. She looked at him, then shook her head, and pushed it back. Tomas stood between them, unsure. Caleb scooped half the stew into another bowl, set it on the ground, and turned away. No forcing, no arguing. Nia ate slowly, every movement cautious. The bruises around her ankles were dark and swollen. Caleb did not ask. He simply handed her a clean strip of cloth and set it near her hand. Night settled fully around them. The wind whispered through the pine branches like voices in the dark. Tomas had fallen asleep beside his mother. Caleb draped his cloak over the boy first, then pulled his own coat tighter. A long while passed before Nia spoke barely above a whisper. As if afraid to wake the forest. "They did not hang me to kill me." Caleb did not turn his head. "They hung me to see who would stop," she continued. "Who was dumb enough or soft enough?" Caleb slowly lit a cigarette. The tiny flame flickered, casting lines of weariness across his face. "They came into town," Nia said, spoke politely, bought liquor, bought silence. "And when they needed to, they bought people." Caleb exhaled smoke. He had guessed as much, but hearing it from her lips still made something feel dirty. Crawled down his spine. "For men," she said. "Always four." For the first time that night, Caleb turned to look at her. The firelight flickered in Nia's eyes, not with fear, but with a quiet fury, long suppressed. "I am not running anymore," she said. "If they come, I will not be hung again." Caleb nodded. Just once. Like a promise that did not need words, he stood, took up his gun, and stepped away from the firelight. He began circling their camp, every step slow, measured. From deep in the woods, far off, a dry branch snapped lightly. Caleb stopped. He knew that sound. Not an animal, a person. Morning came slowly in the forest. Dew clung to the pine needles. The ground was soft and wet, and the cold clung to the skin like smoke. Caleb had put out the fire well before the sky began to lighten. He did not want to leave any signs behind. Nothing except what could not be helped. They had not gone half a mile when Tomas suddenly stopped. The boy said nothing, just gripped the hem of his mother's shirt. Caleb followed his gaze. 4 horses stood still in a thinning patch of forest, reins hanging loose. No attempt to hide. No sign of haste. 4 men stepped out. They were dressed like traders, clean coats, boots still new, guns slung low. The man in front smiled and raised both hands chest high. A gesture of someone who preferred not to make trouble unless he had to. "We are looking for someone," he said, voice light, almost friendly. "An Apache girl, her leg." Caleb stepped in front of them. He did not raise his gun, but he did not move aside either. "You are lost," he said. The man smiled wider, glancing at Nia. His eyes lingered a bit too long, like a buyer who already knew the price. "No," he said. "We are right where we need to be." Another man stepped forward and held out a small cloth pouch. It jingled softly. "We do not want trouble." "You hand her over. You get paid." Everybody walks. A gust of wind moved through the trees. Tomas stepped back behind his mother. Nia stood tall, refusing to look away. Her hand tightened around a stone she had picked up at some point. Caleb looked at the pouch, then at each of their faces. He saw what the town would never say aloud. These men were not afraid of the law. They were used to buying silence, buying time, buying people. "And if I say no?" Caleb asked. The man's smile did not disappear. It just thinned. "Then you make things harder for everyone." A long silence followed. Caleb could hear his heartbeat slow and steady. That old feeling from war settling in like an old coat. He stepped back half a pace. Not to yield, just to choose his ground. "Leave," he said. "Before this forest swallows you." The leader glanced around, trees thick, sightlines short. He understood. He nodded, still smiling. "We will be back," he said. "And next time we will not be talking." The 4 men mounted their horses and rode off. The sound of hooves faded, but not quickly. Caleb did not exhale. He turned to Nia. "They will come back," he said. "And they are not coming to talk." Nia nodded. She bent down and picked up more stones, stuffing them into the pocket of her torn coat. This time she was not running. Caleb chose the place to make his stand before the sun climbed too high. A stretch of sparse pine forest with jagged rocks and narrow lines of sight. Here, horses could not charge fast. Here, numbers meant nothing. He placed Tomas in a rock hollow, covered with dry branches. Nia stood beside him. No questions, no arguments. Her coat pockets were stuffed with stones she had picked up along the way. The sound of hoofbeats came just as the sunlight touched the treetops. 4 figures split apart, spreading into formation. No more smiles, no more politeness. The leader raised a hand, then dropped it. The first gunshot cracked through the trees. Caleb fired from behind a tree, aiming low. The man on the left dropped with a short cry, then went silent. The second one reacted fast, rolling to the side and returning fire. Bullets tore through bark, splinters stinging Caleb's face. He shifted position and fired again. That man fell back, his gun spinning from his hand. The third charged forward, screaming, firing wildly. One bullet hit Caleb's arm. The pain burned like fire. His gun nearly slipped. He clenched his jaw, stepped back. At that moment, a stone flew through the air. It struck the man square in the leg. He stumbled, losing balance. Caleb fired. The man collapsed face first into the wet ground. The last one froze for a second, just long enough to realize this forest did not belong to him. He turned, kicked his horse, and vanished into the trees. Silence fell faster than the smoke. Caleb leaned back against a pine, breathing heavy. Blood ran down his arm, soaking his sleeve. Nia rushed over, tore fabric from her shirt, and wrapped the wound tight. Her hands were steady. Her eyes never left the part of the woods where the last man had disappeared. "He will talk," Caleb said quietly. Nia nodded. "I know." Tomas stepped out from the rock hollow. The boy did not cry. He looked at the bodies on the ground, then at Caleb's bloodied hand. He held out the last clean strip of cloth he had. Caleb took it. He looked at the boy for a long time. Then he nodded like an apology without words. Far off, the wind stirred brittle branches. Not an animal. Caleb knew this was not over. It had only just changed its price. They left the forest before the sun reached its peak. Caleb did not leave behind graves. He pulled dry branches over the bodies of the three who remained, not out of pity, but so Tomas would not have to keep looking. His injured arm throbbed with every step. But he did not slow down. The cabin appeared at the bottom of the valley like a forgotten wooden box. The roof sagged. The door hung crooked. One window shattered, but it was still standing, still kept out the rain, still enough to survive the night. Caleb pushed the door open. Dust rose in the air. He sat Tomas down in the far corner and handed him a little water. Nia moved quietly, checking around the house, gathering planks that were still usable, setting up a makeshift bar for the door. No one spoke a word. It was not until late afternoon that Caleb allowed himself to sit. The blood had dried, his arm swollen and stiff. Nia rewrapped the bandage, tying it tighter than necessary, as if to remind him not to forget the price just paid. "The one who got away will come back," she said. Caleb nodded. "He will talk in town." No further explanation was needed. They both understood. Once the story spread, the truth would twist. 3 men dead in the forest, 1 white man covered in blood, an Apache woman who had once been strung up. The town would not ask why. They would only ask who.